It's Sunday, October 19, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, our opportunity to dive deeper into the subjects of US politics, society, and culture that rarely get enough airtime on the corporate media. Stories that end up as a 10-second soundbite here form the basis of a 60-minute conversation in this safe space. And it's my pleasure to speak each week to some of the great thought leaders and change makers shaping the American experience. Today, we revisit three of our most compelling speakers from this series: Miles Taylor, Kat Abughazaleh, and Professor David K. Johnston.
You know, Donald has this bizarre mercantilist view of economics. He has an economics degree from an Ivy League school, but he knows nothing about economics. And Donald and I have talked a lot about economics in the last 4 decades. He has no clue, and he believes that if you impose a tariff, it means that China or India or Canada pays American taxes. No, it's effectively a retail sales tax on American consumers. It's also a scheme to allow domestic manufacturers to raise prices to just below the tariffed good and increase their profits, extracting more money from the vast majority of people and concentrating it in the hands of just a very few people. Donald doesn't know anything. I mean, the most telling thing about that is that in his first term, a couple of months into office, he was going to Japan. They stopped in Hawaii so he could promote his Trump-branded apartment building. And then they went to the USS Arizona Memorial, and he says to his chief of staff, retired Marine General Kelly, what are we going to? What is this? He didn't know what happened on December 7, 1941. How much more evidence do you need of his ignorance? And there's many other examples.
But he also doesn't care, does he? I mean, that's the difference. Like, not knowing is one thing, but he has no empathy. And we know, because part of the problem is that we spend so much time trying to analyze a madman, right?
You can't humiliate him. It's not possible to humiliate him.
Right. But because he is a malignant narcissist, and because he is a sociopath, as confirmed by dozens of psychiatrists in their analysis of him, they don't need to sit down with him. He has had more television appearances than anybody. There is a very clear diagnosis there. And yet people like yourself and myself, we spend ages trying to kind of get to the bottom of this decision-making, which simply comes from a place of insanity. So with that, and racism. So with that, how do we move forward? How does anybody move forward? How do Democrats move forward when the enemy that they're fighting is as mad as a box of frogs?
So, you've hit upon, I think, the fundamental problem. The Democrats, up until now at least, have not figured out an effective strategy to deal with Donald Trump. But I would suggest there are several important things they can do. One of them is you don't compromise with him. Compromise doesn't work. You want to get a bill passed, it's got things that you like, but it's got stuff that's going to help Trump establish and consolidate his power so that he is the unquestionable, unchallengeable dictator. That's what he's working on. He is a dictator, but he isn't fully consolidated his power. You have to say, gee, I'm sorry, it's going to hurt some people I like, but I'm going to do everything I can to prevent this bill from becoming law. You have to draw a firm line in the sand. Secondly, you needed every opportunity to point out to people where Trump is being destructive, whether it's the satellite in the sky, burning food intended for poor people, the closing of rural hospitals, which has already begun, even though the cuts haven't started.
Yes,
in America, and not in any way give up. And I think you really need to push, especially with people who claim to be Christians. You need to push the child rapist part of this. And again, let me be clear, by the way, I don't have any solid proof that Donald Trump was having sex with 13-year-old girls. I have their testimony that they were forced to do this. And quoting Trump on things like, you should be glad you're losing your virginity to Donald Trump, not some incompetent 14-year-old boy. But let's see the evidence. And if the evidence shows, oh, no, Donald Trump had nothing to do with any of this, then put it out there. The fact that they won't tells you otherwise. It's a need to be relentless, to recognize there's a fatigue factor that cuts into people over time, but don't compromise. And institutions need to stand up. When Trump went after Columbia University, which has a $13 billion endowment, said, I'm going to take $400 million from you. I believe the appropriate response to that, and if I'd been the president of Columbia, I would have said, well, Mr. Trump, we will see you in court. In the meantime, we're going to take the necessary funds from our endowment, and we're going to ask people to donate. And I know, because I was the first journalist in America to cover philanthropy as nonprofits as a hard news beat 40 years ago, many, many top fundraisers. And I called a bunch of them and said, $400 million Columbia fighting Trump. And every one of them said they could raise that money in a handful of days. I called a multi-billionaire I know. I texted a multi-billionaire that I know, and who could cover it all. And he said, I wouldn't cover it all. I wouldn't even cover a quarter of it because it looks like mine. But I would be able to, through people I know, raise the $400 million in a matter of days. Columbia knuckled under. And now we've seen these other institutions knuckle under. No, you can't do that. And I give a lot of talks to people. And in them, people say, well, what do we do? And I say, look, if you're not brave enough to stand at the front of the line, that's okay. Most people aren't. Don't expect that. Stand behind those people. Donate to the causes that will do this. Support them. And for God's sake, don't go after them because there's some little thing they said that's 5% of what's happening, and make that the issue. Recognize the goal here. We have a madman in the White House, an utterly ignorant madman who thinks only of himself and who is consolidating his power day by day. Stick with the fundamental important message. Now, we can still get out of this. We don't have to become a dictatorship that endures, but we can't. I mean, it's not at this point at all uncertain, and it's I'm less optimistic today than I was when you and I spoke at the beginning of this year, but there's no reason to give up hope. And don't be cynical. Nothing helps Donald Trump more than people saying, well, all the politicians are corrupt. You know, all of them are sleeping around. Yeah, no evidence Joe Biden or Barack Obama was ever sleeping around.
It's not helpful, is it, to do that in this moment? But we need to see coalition building. I mean, I was surprised that the universities didn't join together, all of them, from Harvard through Columbia, and create a kind of and ring fence their authority. Is there rivalry between universities? I mean, is that the reason why they didn't do that?
No, I think the reason has to do with their boards of trustees, who are almost always very wealthy people. Usually there's, like one student representative from previous classes, things like that. But they're usually very, very wealthy people, and they're afraid. They're cowed by this. Now, I would point out the professorship has stood up much more. And one of the things I've been pointing out since I'm a professor at RIT is, when Donald says that we're being ripped off by these other countries, we're the source of foreign earnings. My students who come from overseas, they pay 100% of the tuition. We don't give discounts for that. I had a child who wanted to go to law school in Canada. I had to pay 100% of the Canadian tuition.
But he's asked for the lists of these people so he can deport them.
Well, yes, but what we should be arguing is, Donald, if you're worried that we're not earning enough money from the rest of the world, you should be endorsing professors. You should be endorsing the researchers who develop products. Now, Russell Vogt, who was the principal person behind Project 2025, which is where all of this destruction of the government is going on, he just went after the NIH. He says, well, all they're doing is woke stuff. And he picked a couple of research projects they're doing. Well, when you hear that there were professors who spent 20 years studying the saliva of Gila monsters that live in the Southwest desert, you think, yeah, that sounds kind of weird. Why would you do that? Ozempic and all the drugs like it came from that research. There's another one where they were studying some insect that instead of biting you, stabs you. What's going on there? Eventually, what they've done now is they don't have them on the market yet, but they found out, oh, here's a painkiller that's not addictive. It's not an opioid, but it's highly effective. That's what basic research is. And here's the killer fact for those people to whom facts mean something. More than half of the growth in the GDP in America per capita, per person, since 1948, the year I was born, is because of taxpayer investments in what's called basic science. That was I was just describing. There's no commercial application. You're trying to figure something out. Then people go, oh, we can make a product and make a fortune off of it. More than half. So you do what Donald Trump is doing. The implication is that 75 years from now, America will be half as wealthy. And I understand many people don't understand science. There's a movement among some of the what I call faux or fake Christians that science is just another religion and we need to stamp it out. But we should. These are idiots, and we shouldn't be giving in to people. And I mean idiot in the classic Greek ancient world sense of you only care about yourself. That's what the word originally meant. I used to teach the law of the ancient world. That's what the word meant in ancient Attica. You only cared about yourself.
I want to tap into your expertise on economics, because the tariffs that have been, branded around for the last 6 months kicked in on Thursday. And this is going to change the economy seismically as I see it. Some countries have done quite interesting things. They are playing Donald Trump. Ursula von der Leyen, for example, a very smart woman in the Oval Office, kind of promised $600 billion worth of investment. Trump claims that he can do anything he wants with that. He can invest in anything he wants. He even said they're giving me $600 billion. He didn't even refer to the US or the economy as a whole. So they're starting to play him. Incidentally, the EU is not able to give $600 billion. They would have to vote on it, and that's not going to happen. But even Tim Apple, who has Tim Cook, who shall forever be known as Tim Apple. Right. I don't know if you saw the video sequence of him in the Oval Office presenting Donald Trump with this 24-karat gold stand with a kind of donut-shaped design. It was a sweetener. And Tim Apple, I've got to stop saying that. Tim Cook I've met Tim Cook. He's a fantastic individual, but he's a gay man. I'm sure he absolutely hates Trump and all of the policies that he stands for, although he would never say that out loud for the sake of his shareholders. But he played this game like foreign dignitaries giving gifts to kings or queens. He came in with this box and he set it up on the Resolute desk, and it was awful. Like I could see his whole soul kind of imploding as he had to do it. This is happening often. Gifts from businesses or foreign nations, or fake deals that are announced so that Trump has something to show and be proud of.
So in his first term, Anthony, Donald announced ExxonMobil was going to make a $25 billion capital investment because of him. So correct. I went to their filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and lo and behold, they had previously announced and had already planned $25 billion. And if you looked at the previous 4 or 5 years of investment, there was no change whatsoever. This is Donald creating his own reality. He's not the only person in public life I've covered who creates his own reality, but nobody does it with the level of skill and focus that he does. Now, on the tariffs, I need to give a little very brief history lesson, but it's very important. When the fifth-rate British General Cornwallis surrendered to the American forces, we created a government called the Articles of Confederation. It had no president. It had no power to tax. It had no power to regulate business. And it required unanimous consent on everything. Surprise, surprise, it didn't work. And so a meeting to handle a dispute over moving sandbars in the Delaware River, which separates New Jersey and Pennsylvania, turned into writing the U.S. Constitution. And that Constitution gave us a president, but the reason we did it was 2 things. It gave our government the power to tax us. Totally contrary to what Americans thought. Tax is terrible, horrible thing. 4-letter word spelled in 3 letters. And the power to regulate business. Under the U.S. Constitution, only Congress can impose tariffs, except for a very narrow emergency area that Congress has given to presidents, and which has been basically unexercised because it's so minor. What Trump is negotiating are deals, if there actually are deals. We have yet to see one of them in writing. But he has no authority to do this. So anybody who's paying a tariff is going to do so along with a claim to get the money back. So it's the importer who originally pays the tax. So BMW doesn't pay it. It's the company that imports the BMW, which may be an arm of BMW. It may be an American company on its own. And they're all going to seek to get this back. Tariffs have a secondary and very important effect. Imagine you own Anthony Davis cars, and you sell cars made in Michigan out the door for $10,000 each wholesale, and you make a $1,000 profit. Trump puts a 60% tariff on Chinese cars. I don't know of any Chinese car right now sold in the U.S. You're not going to continue to sell cars for $10,000 because the Chinese competing car is $16,000. You're going to raise your price to $15,000. That means you're going to make a profit now of $6,000 a car, not $1,000, but $6,000. And even if you can only sell half as many cars because they're too expensive for people to buy, you're going to make $3,000 compared to the one you were making. You're going to triple your profits. This is a scheme to take money out of the pockets of ordinary people and redistribute them. That's what I wrote a best-selling series on how the American economy really works early in this century. Perfectly legal, taxes, free lunch subsidies, the fine print suppressing competition, all still in print, by the way, after years. And those books explain how money is quietly siphoned out of the pockets of ordinary people and sent to the top. Well, after my books came out, not inspired by my books, I don't believe, but after it came out, the Rand Corporation, the think tank that the Air Force and the federal government started and Boeing Corporation started in 1948, did a study. Well, how much money's been redistributed upward? Because everybody thinks, we're being taxed to give money to the poor. We have a minimal welfare state in this country. $50 trillion in about 45 years. If the bottom 99% of Americans had $1 trillion a year more for a half century, we wouldn't have all these people who are desperate. You wouldn't see people driving beater cars that don't belong on the road. You wouldn't see people in horrible debt and terrified. They're what's called in America ALICE, asset limited, income constrained, employed. So you work, you don't make enough money to get by, and you don't have any savings. To escape poverty, according to the ALICE measure developed by a charity group called United Way, in metropolitan areas of the East Coast and the West Coast and the few in the Midwest like Chicago, a couple with no children needs to make about $80,000 a year, and a couple with children who need childcare needs to make over $90,000 a year. That's to escape poverty. Yet half of American households get by on about $60,000 or less. And so Donald Trump is engaged in a scheme that is designed by the people who are pushing this stuff on him to extract more money from ordinary people and redistribute it to people who have more money than they can ever make any use of. Jeremy Bentham taught us, and John Mill, and not quite Adam Smith, he hadn't gotten to that point, but marginal utility. I tell my students, imagine it's the last day of the year, and you have to prove to the government after the year ends where your last dollar came from under penalty of death. Well, if you work at some job 40 or 60 hours a week and it's only your salary, that's not a problem. What if you're a billionaire? You're going to die because you can't prove which dollar came last. And there are literally people who on the last day of the year have to say to themselves, well, I can eat dinner or I can take the bus to go home. Which am I going to do? Because I don't have any money. And we're measuring our society under Donald Trump by how many billionaires and centimillionaires we have, not by how is the average typical American doing. And they don't care. It's very clear.
But you've touched on something that I think is really important. I mean, I've been peddling a theory that they actually want people to die.
I think that's true.
There is this desire by taking away these either essential services or the support network or vaccines for pandemics or even the flu, that they know they might look at the chart on flu and go, okay, this many people die, invariably they are poor, and so therefore we are going to shut down the free flu vaccine. Is it as macabre as that?
It is exactly that macabre. There are videos out there of prominent politicians on the right saying about all the deaths from COVID, which, remember, in America, more than 1 million people died more than we needed if we'd followed the science. Yes. That's just culling the herd. People were going to die anyway, and now we don't have to spend all that money on them. About 25 years ago, and I encourage you to get and put on your air the video of this, a congressman, an obnoxious guy, a lawyer from Florida, Democrat named Alan Grayson, said, here's the Republican health care plan. If you get sick, die quickly or die soon. And he was, I think he was formally censured by Congress for saying that. He certainly was criticized heavily. But you know what? He was right. It was exactly right. There is no sanctity of human life. This is not a new thing. When I was spending 3 years of my life telling the true story of the LAPD, how incompetent and brutal and all the crimes they were committing and how corrupt the department was when I was at the LA Times, there was a lot of bad shootings that I wrote about. And members of the police commission were trying to get into the mindset of the LAPD leadership, the sanctity of human life. And we've lost a lot of that in the world. We need to respect human life. So starving people, whether it's through the aid program in Africa or what we're seeing happen in Gaza, taking food stamps away from poor families and children, saying we're going to stop federally funded school lunches for children, many of whom that's the only food they get. That is simply an utter disregard for human life, and that it's people in many cases who call themselves Christians who say that is appalling. And so one of the things I've also done in some of my talks is I've called on people who are actual Christians, who try to live a life of caring for other people and sacrifice, said you need to call these people out. You need to say you're not Christians.
But that is starting to happen, isn't it? We're seeing it at town halls, especially with a Republican audience calling out their elected representative. My question, though, really, and I suppose there's a good place to finish, is that if you are starting to recognize, if you voted for Trump, and, we've seen this from the Latino community, for example, so many votes for Donald Trump and their family are being deported and they're staying home and not going to work for fear of being abducted and sent to a country they've never even been to. So I hope and I pray that community is starting to see where they went wrong with their vote. Some of the Christians who voted for Trump because he was their Messiah are starting to see that everything that he is doing is so fundamentally anti-Christian. But what about regular Republicans, fiscal conservatives maybe, who see that tariffs are a lie and that they are designed to enrich Trump and his wealthy friends, but for everybody else they're going to carry the can for these costs? And obviously there was that horrific bill that we haven't spoken about yet that basically enshrined this into law. This kind of stealing from the poor and giving it to the rich, the kind of reverse Robin Hood scheme. That people will actually vote against Donald Trump and the people that support and represent him. Do you think that actual shift will happen?
Yeah. Trump has demanded every state provide certification for their election results to the federal government, which appears to all be part of a scheme to rig the election. And remember, every time Donald Trump loses, he didn't get nominated for an Emmy for his TV show. Well, the system's rigged. This is always his complaint, and it's nonsense.
Right.
It takes time to break people away. So up until April 1, we had good job growth. The Biden effects that created more jobs than all the Republicans since World War II in just 4 years. That's now stopped. Job growth in America is pretty much stopped. I won't be shocked if we end up in a month or three having negative job growth. The costs of goods are not going down. Donald promised he was going to lower drug prices by 1,500%, which is mathematically impossible.
That's right, and eggs by 400%.
Right, and 90% of the generic drugs in the United States come from India, so they're now going to cost more. But it takes time for these things to filter through the economy. But you're going to see more and more people as Trump's incompetence and the appointment of all these incompetent people affect him. Nobody in America, except for a crazy pure Trumper, believes gasoline is $1.99 a gallon. It's about $3.20 a gallon across the country. And so this will catch up with him, but it takes time.
Yeah.
And the elections are in November of 26. That's plenty of time for the economy to fall apart. And I'm sorry that's going to happen. People are going to suffer. There are people who are going to die. But without that, then this wouldn't change because people can justify to themselves. Rationalization is one of the great skills of the human mind. And none of us want to say, oh, I got taken here. A con artist made me a mark. It's embarrassing. I mean, we periodically will have a story, about some husband or wife who lost all their money in a Nigerian prince scam, and the retirement comes, and then the person kills themselves, or sometimes they kill themselves and their spouse because they can't address it. We're going to have to go through some terrible pain for this. I'm hoping that Starmer and the other world leaders continue to not knuckle under to Donald. A few of them have, but most of them, they've played him the way that Tim Cook played him. And Donald is so dumb that he doesn't get that. And by the way, remember one of his professors at Penn said about him, he's the damnedest, dumbest student I ever had. And I assure you from many hours spent with Donald Trump that his lack of knowledge and lack of shame about being so doesn't affect him. So the conditions are going to create breaks and separations. There are going to be people 100 years from now who go, Donald Trump was right. Just like there are people who say Hitler was right. Don't worry about them. Worry about the people you can move a little bit. You can put a wedge in and separate them and get them to open their eyes. And if we get a Democratic majority in the House, a lot of what Trump is doing stops. If we can get a majority of Democrats in the Senate, which given who's up for election, that's a good chance we could do it. That stops all of his nominations of people like Emil Bove, who's now on the federal appeals court in Washington, and who, according to career prosecutors, told him to ignore federal court orders the government doesn't like. We can stop that. We don't have enough to impeach people and remove them. It would take 67 senators, 2/3, to do that. But people, don't lose heart. Don't be fatigued. Don't be cynical. Focus on the places you can change, not the things you can't change or do anything about. Stay informed and look for things where there's some coordination to information. I've tried to get a journalist who's spent a lot of time following all the developments about the Epstein files and the young women. And I said, would you please write a piece for DC Report, the news service I founded 7 years ago. I don't run it anymore because I couldn't stand doing it every day. But I said, how about you put together a piece for us with links to videos and a timeline so people can see that it's not a random thing here or there. There's a full record you can put in one place. And I got that idea simply because my wife, a brilliant woman who was the CEO of one of the biggest charities in America for 30 years, I was discussing something about the Epstein case, and she said, I didn't know any of that. I said, what? She reads the New York Times every day and the local paper and other things. And she went, I didn't know any of that. I knew there were some women. And you said there's 1,000 women? And I said, yeah, there's somewhere close to 1,000 women. And she said, where have I read that? And I suddenly realized, oh, you're right. Nobody has put together. We need some journalists to put these things together. And lots of journalists are doing great work. The New York Times, where I worked, I pick it up and I go, boy, there's a story that is some of the greatest journalism human beings have ever produced. On the other hand, you move over one column and I go, pure crap. This reporter can write a good story, but they don't know what the hell they're writing about. That's so be skeptical of the journalism you read, but don't reject it. Just read it with a grain of salt, pay attention, recognize there's huge skill differences and understanding of the world differences among journalists. I urge Americans a lot to read The Guardian, which is just again and again and again, along with the Wall Street Journal and the Miami Herald, done great work on a number of issues about Trump, as well as the New York Times and the Washington Post. But this didn't happen in a day. the conditions that allowed Donald Trump to arise that are explained in my books I mentioned earlier on the economy, Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and the Fine Print, that took place over 50 years. You're not going to fix this overnight. And when Donald Trump is gone, assuming we succeed and we get rid of him, that is not the end of the story. We have to go back and fix the Constitution. Large parts of the Constitution are unenforceable because no one has standing to enforce them. We've got to go and fix those provisions, and we have to recognize that people who want to get power to abuse it and people who are decent and want to make the society better, there will always be a tension. There will always be people in both of those groups. That is the human condition. 10,000 years from now, there will be issues like this because that's who we are as a species.
My days are always packed. Meetings and deadlines and recording and writing. So when I finally hit the mattress at the end of the day, I need it to deliver. My Sapira from Lisa has completely changed how I recharge at night. It gives me the kind of deep, restorative sleep that I didn't realize I was missing. I've learned that how you sleep is just as important as how long you sleep, and Lisa really delivers on the how. My Sapira adjusts to my body and sleep position in a way that feels intentional and balanced. The support helps me fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. My Sapira from Lisa is the closest thing I've found to a staycation. The second I lie down, everything quiets. It's plush, peaceful, and somehow instantly relaxing. It's the one part of my day that feels indulgent in all the right ways. Lisa has a lineup of beautifully crafted mattresses tailored to how you sleep. Each mattress is designed with specific sleep positions and feel preferences in mind. From night one, you'll feel the difference. Premium materials that deliver serious comfort and full body support no matter how you sleep. Go to lisa.com for 20% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code WEEKEND exclusive for our viewers. That's leesa.com, promo code WEEKEND for 20% off mattresses. That's leesa.com, promo code WEEKEND for 20% off mattresses, plus an extra $50 off. Support our show and let them know we sent you after checkout. lisa.com, promo code WEEKEND. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show with Kat Abughazaleh. I'm Anthony Davis. Kat, your father was a Palestinian immigrant.
Yes.
Came to the US.
Yes.
And how has that affected your ability to campaign? Because I'm sure there are going to be people that will see you as a terrorist and a whole bunch of other things through their narrow field of view. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, you'll never believe this, but people are a lot more normal in real life than they are online. I've had someone ask me, well, what if someone won't vote for you because you're Palestinian? And I'm like, then they won't vote for me. Like, I can't change that about myself. This district does have it has a big Jewish population. And I've been making a real effort to talk, especially with Jewish constituents, about, their concerns, where they're at. I think it's one of these things where a lot of people that aren't Palestinian or Jewish or Israeli have a lot to say about how we should feel about the situation. And then just kind of ignore what we actually say. And like, the fact of the matter is that Jewish people have been the greatest allies in the fight for Palestinian rights. Like, they have consistently stood by us, fought for us, and advocated for our basic humanity. And our lives are intertwined. Like, if one of us is suffering, the other one is as well. And the vast majority of people in general, but especially Palestinian and Jewish people, are horrified by what has been happening in Gaza. They don't want civilians killed in their name, just as I don't want elderly Jewish people set on fire, like what happened in Colorado a couple months ago, in mine. Our basic existence has been used as a proxy for others, for their own grievances, their own conspiracy theories, trying to radicalize others. And I've just made a real effort on making sure that, my election isn't just about Israel and Palestine. It's about the 9th district, but also being very honest about where I stand. And that's that anyone who commits war crimes should be held accountable, and anyone that, like, any weapons that are bought with our tax dollars need to be subjected to our own laws.
It's a very difficult subject to broach because there kind of is no answer. That's kind of how I, approach it. I'm like, we're going to talk and we're going to argue and we're going to debate, but ultimately there will be no winner because, it's like when Trump says, I'm going to solve the Middle East. He don't know the first thing about it, but he also ignores the fact that this struggle and this fight has been going on for decades. And so it requires a real investment in understanding the history, which again is something that this current administration is not really capable of. Just on Ukraine for a second, Trump has got round sending weapons now that he's not in love with Putin this week, by saying that the Europeans can buy American weapons and they can send them. And then that kind of appeases his base, but still means that Ukraine are getting some of the support at least that they need. Do you think people are going to buy that? Or at the end of the day, is Trump still, Putin's BFF?
I think that he's very mercurial, and we just don't know what he's going to be feeling next week. And as much as America loves interfering in a lot of, having our fingers in a lot of pies overseas, I do think that one of the most important things we can do is resisting authoritarian leaders like Putin. Like, this is never going to stop with Ukraine. It was never intended to stop with Ukraine. And that's why it's extremely important to keep supporting the Ukrainian people.
It's likely to get worse, though. I mean, my thinking is that within 3 to 5 years, the NATO countries will be at war with Russia. And I, at this moment in time, don't know who Trump would choose to side with.
Me neither. And that's kind of the problem, isn't it?
Scary, considering that, he jokes about World War III when he's in the Oval Office with Zelensky, but, the rest of us who are going to have to face the reality of a nuclear holocaust are having to really think where is safe and who are the goodies and who are the baddies in this fight. Yeah,
it's terrifying. There were some times in 2020 where, like, Trump was pushing, for essentially nuclear warfare. And I used to, this is when I was in college, and I'd text my mom and I'd be like, all right, if DC gets nuked, I'm going to be in the bottom of the Trader Joe's parking lot by my home because it was underground and I had like a little kit. And it's like, that's insane that we even have to think about that. Yeah. And it's so scary having someone so unpredictable running our country and running it for his own profit, and then falling for every authoritarian flattery scheme.
It is amazing, isn't it, that the European leaders have had to kind of put Trump back on track, explaining to him what D-Day means and things like that. But also the people around Trump are having to kind of remind him. Marco Rubio, I guess, has to do an awful lot of this, and even DeSantis has done this a couple of times, where Trump has completely missed the point that he is being manipulated by Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban and any of these characters that Trump claims he has a friendship with because they take his phone calls. It is worrying, because it's not just trying to be safe in the event of mainland war, but also we alluded earlier to the fact that immigrants are not leaving the house and not going to work for fear of being picked up by ICE. Trump has also already crossed the Rubicon by turning the US military on American citizens. This is the authoritarianism that you describe. This is the reality. We're not in threat of authoritarianism. We have already arrived. The dictatorship is pretty much complete, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is why it's so important for Democrats to put up opposition. I have made this argument, and I've heard from some, like, why do you keep, bagging on Democrats? And it's not about bagging on them. It's that you are the only opposition we have right now. It is more important than ever to not normalize it. We've seen in every authoritarian regime that they thrive when, especially in the early stages of consolidating power, the opposition does not put up an actual fight. And the thing is, with fascists, they're weak. That's why they want people to think that they're strong, with all these strongman tactics, trying to scare people, trying to terrify them into doing nothing. I was on MSNBC a couple of weeks ago, right when the first LA protests started, and someone asked me, well, should people be protesting? Because what if Trump escalates? And I was saying, escalate where? Where do we go from deploying our military against U.S. citizens? And so it's really important when fascist regimes start to make sure that leaders are not normalizing it. They don't go after Nancy Pelosi and AOC first. They might in their rhetoric, but not in action. They deport 238 men to a concentration camp overseas without any real reason, without any due process. They attack people that are just walking home. They fire people from their jobs and make sure that they don't have health care, that they can't access SNAP benefits. This is what they do. And so it is so important to call their bluff. We saw this when Senator Van Hollen went down to El Salvador to get his constituent back home. They fold. When Elon Musk brought his army of teenage Nazis to the Treasury Department, every Democrat should have been arm in arm in front of every entrance and every exit and said, you're going to have to drag us away. And they would either have to risk a spectacle that would piss a lot of people off or back down. A lot of people have asked me, like, am I the crazy one here? Am I the crazy one for thinking this is all awful? And no, you're not. But that's why you need leaders to say that. You don't need compromise. Compromise is not getting your hand cut off and being grateful they left you your pinky. You need to stand for what you believe. You need to stand for people. And if you have any sort of influence, any power, any platform, you need to use that for good.
It's now or never, really, isn't it? I mean,
if not now, then when? Like, people were like, well, this isn't the right time to launch a primary challenge because the Democratic Party needs to be together. And I'm like, when would be a better time? When would that be? Right. Because I don't think it's ever. And truly, it is so comforting to think that there is some dream representative in every district that's going to come in and run for office. But guess what? That person is you. We are what we've got. Life is not a movie, and we have to fight while we can. Fascism is antithetical to the human condition. It never lasts, but we need to make sure the fewest number of people get hurt in the meantime.
People need leadership, though, don't they? There is this desire to be led.
That's how humanity works.
We are tribal by nature. I would have liked Kamala Harris, after she'd had a couple of weeks in Hawaii on vacation or wherever, to come straight back into it if she had the energy for it. Because even if she didn't, drink a Red Bull. I mean, I wouldn't deny anybody a vacation after that schedule. But, the reality is people were waiting for her or somebody. Tim Walz did a bit of it, but, in this moment, in this power vacuum, Gavin Newsom has been pretty good, stepping up, presenting himself as a future presidential candidate. He certainly looks the part.
But he's still talking with people like Charlie Kirk, and that's a problem.
And I think maybe he would say he regrets that.
I hope so.
You're right in saying that they fold. I noticed the troops are being removed from California now. 5,000 troops were sent to California. Half of them are being withdrawn this week. With authoritarians, they, as you say, they push first and they'll see how far they can get. But, so much of this playbook is in the document of Project 2025, as Harris says. I can't believe they wrote this stuff down. And so this week we've seen CBS cancel The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I mean, that is really, all this stuff comes as no surprise to me. This was in the Project 2025 document. Yeah. Shutting down all popular culture, the arts. This is part of their process. How did you feel when you heard that? Because, there are darker forces at work here, aren't there?
I was disgusted. We see this with some universities right now, this feeling like with Columbia, this feeling that like, well, if we do what he says, then, then it's over and then we're protected. No, he's going to keep pushing. It's never going to be good enough. And you might not be on the chopping block right now, but guess what? You're next. Maybe not the next time, but the one after that. I am very proud of my former employer, Media Matters. Elon Musk sued them for reporting, and it has been over a year now, like a year and a half, I think, since this whole saga started, and they haven't backed down. And they have a lot less money than some of these universities and some of these organizations do. And I think it's brave to not back down. But it's also self-preservation. This will come for you eventually. And folding is a coward's move. And there's just no way around that. And I get the feeling of, well, I just don't want to have problems. We're already in the problems.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to not just be remembered as someone who stood up for yourself and others, but do you want to actually do that? Do you want to help yourself down the line? Because once again, this is not just ending with Stephen Colbert. Unless CBS is completely under Trump control, and even then, it's never going to stop.
There has been a 20-year-long effort in the United States to try to shape a balance of power that favors America and favors the free world. And one of the bellwethers has been India. Will India side with the United States? Will India remain part of a broader, expanded Western alliance? And I think that question has now been answered. Is we lost that. We squandered it in a very short period of time because Donald Trump drove that bellwether nation, that extraordinary country, into the arms of our adversaries. And you saw that in the photo op with Xi and Putin, wrapping their arms around Modi and showing that this is their new pal. And that, to me, more than almost anything we've seen on the world stage, really sums up what has happened. Is Donald Trump has created a real realignment of the global political order that disfavors freedom and that disfavors the United States of America. Also a thing that was very foreseeable, Anthony. I mean, I've now spent the better part of 7 or 8 years warning that if Donald Trump came back to power, he would reshape the world order in a way that favors autocrats. John Bolton's been talking about it. A lot of folks who've worked under Donald Trump have talked about how, if given a second term, he would create a world that's much more favorable to our adversaries. And he's doing that. And we're seeing that play out in real time. And that has very real implications for all sorts of things that affect everyday Americans' lives. I mean, usually geopolitics feels so removed from the person in Ohio or Oregon who's watching the news. But that realignment that we are seeing, the driving of our friends into the arms of our adversaries, is going to be bad for the way Americans buy goods, sell goods, how they travel, where they travel, their physical safety, our safety as a country, and our children's future. Those things are dramatically impacted by that realignment. And, whatever weird tweets Donald Trump sends out, I don't think they're going to be sufficient to turn that tide.
And let's just remind people what pissed India off? I mean, it was a combination of things, wasn't it? I mean, firstly, Trump trying to take credit for ending the war between India and Pakistan, which was ridiculous and entirely untrue. But secondly, imposing a 50% tariff on top of previous tariffs on India. I mean, he certainly doesn't understand international trade. But I also get the feeling that he didn't foresee the fact that people wouldn't want to travel to the US when people's phones are being seized at the airport and people are being treated like criminals before they've even set foot in the country. I mean, is anybody saying anything to him? Because from what I've seen, there are no adults or experts in the room at any of these meetings.
Well, here's what happened in the first administration. There were people on both sides of that question. There were people who were intense nativists who wanted to literally close America's borders, not just to illegal immigration, but to legal immigration. And there were people who believed in the post-war order of free markets and free people that have made Americans the most prosperous and powerful nation in the history of the world. And the battle was usually won inside the administration by the latter group. So think the Steve Mnuchins of the world versus the Stephen Millers of the world in those debates. But now we have an administration that's now largely populated by those nativists who are more than happy to see tourism numbers go down in the United States, legal and illegal immigration go down in the United States. They don't mind that people are self-selecting out of this country and moving out. They want to raise the walls up. They want the United States to be more homogenous, and that's the vision that they're hoping for. Is they're hoping for a much more protectionist country writ large, and they're going to get it. And I think Donald Trump at the end of the day is actually in his heart of hearts not as amenable to that worldview. But the Oval Office is now a complete echo chamber. I mean, I think he could potentially be more open to a free trade style economy, because we saw him sometimes tip the balance in those debates, to Mnuchin and others. But he's very impressionable. And, now he's got folks that are only saying the one thing, and he's leaning into the protectionist version of himself, full speed.
And easily manipulated. And we saw this when he arranged this ridiculous meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska.
Yeah.
Extremely costly, clearly served no purpose. The fly past, the whole red carpet treatment for a war criminal, and nothing has come of it. Even sanctions that Trump claimed he would impose upon Russia, the deadline of which has come and gone, and Trump has done nothing. Putin is benefiting hugely from all of this, isn't he? And is it that Trump is just simply on Putin's side? He wants to be on that podium with these dictators. That's where he sees himself. He doesn't care for the European allies. He sees them as kind of weak and not dictatorial enough. Is it as simple as that?
It is as simple as that. And
I was worried you were going to say that.
Yeah, Trump's national security team in the first term, I would say one of the top three things that we worried about is his ability to be fooled by foreign leaders through flattery. There was a very palpable fear anytime he took a phone call from a foreign leader, anytime he met with them, because there was this sense. I mean, look, foreign leaders knew this. They knew he was. It's obvious to anyone who watches television. The man is deeply susceptible to flattery, and so you can shape his worldview by flattering him. And Putin played him like a fiddle. He didn't even play him like a fiddle. I suspect a fiddle is kind of difficult to play. I mean, he probably, he played him like a clarinet. He's just got to plug his fingers over the holes and blow into the tube. And that's all Putin had to do to Trump in the lead up to and during this summit. And the fact that he, planted things in Trump's brain again about mail-in voting that have now turned into, potential executive orders and actions. I mean, it took nothing. It took the push of a finger on the first domino in a meeting with Putin for Trump to start going off on different paths and tangents that Putin wants him to go off on, because it'll be damaging to the United States. But I have to go back to Anthony. You asked, is it as simple as that? I will tell you how simple it is, because I think we forget sometimes. We wrap ourselves in the words of geopolitics and free market economics, and we wrap our selves in these discussions of history. It's not about any of that. It's about that the president of the United States is an observable idiot. He is very dumb. He is a very dumb, not well-read, intelligent man who can't synthesize thoughts, who can't track things across meetings, who can't remember things, who acts like a dementia patient when he goes to the microphone. He is an idiot. And we are getting the predictable results of that. We are getting a whiplash presidency that jumps all over the place, that puts the American people in danger. We are getting what we deserve by having put this man in office. And it's important every now and then for us to step back and acknowledge that. I mean, there's not three-dimensional chess that Donald Trump's playing. He's not playing any game. He is a stupid man who is not fit to be in the office that he's in, and he's in that office. And it's not surprising that a stupid man in that job makes very stupid decisions all the time. And those stupid decisions are not game board decisions. The pieces are American lives. And we are almost every week seeing new ways that American lives are in danger, from early in the administration when they're firing people who protect nuclear weapons, all the way up to the past few days when they're firing people at FEMA who are supposed to protect American lives. And why? Because the people at FEMA sounded the alarm about a potential catastrophe. They said, we're going to have another Katrina. We are in danger. And for warning that we are in danger, the administration wrapped duct tape over their mouths. You can't come up with something more ironic than that. And that is what you see in authoritarian regimes, is the people who sound the alarm and say, dear leader, we need to tell you the truth, we're in danger, are the people who get silenced. That's what's happening in this country. And it's because we've put an observable idiot back in the Oval Office.
And the media legitimize him because of respect for the office, that they kind of translate his idiocy into some kind of order. And that is very dangerous, isn't it? That he almost relies on the media that he refers to as the fake news to legitimize his ridiculousness.
Yeah, look, that needs to stop. And I've got to say, I rarely attack the press because the president does that sufficiently. I mean, the free press in this country is under assault. But some of the major networks, especially the ones that are backed by big corporate conglomerates, have been falling asleep on the job by doing this sort of both sidesism. They so desperately want to be back in a different era of American politics that they are covering this man as if they didn't witness the first 4 years of it. And the place that I'm going to have a lot of heartburn with this is when something egregious happens, egregious enough to get some of those networks to wake up and they say, my God, who could have predicted Donald Trump would do this? I will say you did, because you were covering it in the first term and you saw these things happen. You can't act surprised that they would happen this second time. And that's why, Anthony, I think it is actually very, very important that in this moment in our country, we have seen an explosion in new media, because legacy media is at the moment failing us. And it's failing us by burying its head in the sand and hoping that Donald Trump will somehow normalize. That's not going to happen. There isn't a day in the next 3.5 years, if that's all that Donald Trump serves, where he is going to start moderating and backpedaling and going a different direction. That's not going to happen. It's going to get worse. And we don't need those news organizations to just hate him to hate him. I don't need them to have emotive feelings about the man. They just need to cover it with the realism of a country that's sliding into autocracy. That's happening in the United States of America. It's very real, and it's the biggest fucking news story since any of those news organizations have ever existed. They should cover it that way.
On Thursday, you posted Trump is expected to sign an executive order that seeks to change the Department of Defense back to the Department of War. This presidential action is heavy with symbolism and meaning in the stupidest way possible. This focus on war fighters and Pete Hegseth, a kind of Fox News host, completely out of his depth in the Department of Defense. We saw a Venezuelan boat have a missile dropped on it the other day, killing 11 people in international waters. We don't know who those 11 people were. Trump claims that they were narcotics or gang members or something, very kind of loose description of who they might be. I mean, that in itself will be seen as a war crime from the international community. What do you think Venezuela thinks right now? Do they think they're at war, or that America is now at war with them?
Well, let me start with the first part, because I think it is actually interesting to focus on that symbolism of his renaming it the Department of War. And it's symbolic in all of the ways that he does not intend. And one of those, of course, is that we changed the name of the Department of War to the Department of Defense for a very important philosophical reason, which is that the United States doesn't believe in being in endless wars. It believes that force should only be used in our self-defense, right? And that's why in 1947, officially with the National Security Act, we changed the focus into the U.S. Department of Defense. So that's point number one. Point number two, a second irony, is that Donald Trump, of course, got elected on this mantra that he was going to end the forever wars and that he was the president of peace. So again, another irony for him to be attracted to Department of War. The third, of course, is that he is proclaiming to change this with an executive order. It requires an act of Congress to change that title. All of these three things combined, these three ironies, sort of unintentionally reveal Donald Trump's autocratic tendencies. He's trying to unilaterally change the name of a department whose name was supposed to reflect American values, and to beat his chest in a war-fighting posture in a way that contradicts his own campaign mantras. And I don't think he sees any of that irony. But Anthony, you point to the very real effects of this mentality, because it's not just about the name that's outside the building. It's about the mentality of the guy who wants to change something to the Department of War. And we are seeing Donald Trump enter into one of the phases I had predicted, which is misusing the United States military to do things that are against international law, to engage in things that are definitionally war crimes. And I believe we saw that this past week. There was a boat that left Venezuela in the Caribbean that allegedly had 11 drug smugglers on it, and the administration launched a missile strike and blew up that boat and incinerated all 11 people on board. Now, you don't need to have any sympathy for drug smugglers coming out of Venezuela who are trying to poison American streets with drugs. But you can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time, which is that we should go after those criminals, but we probably shouldn't murder them if we have the opportunity to arrest them. Why? Well, that's what we do in the United States, is you use appropriate force. So if there's a drug dealer down the block from you, well, you call the police on him, and maybe the police go arrest him. What the police don't do is surround his house, pour kerosene around the outside, light it on fire, and burn everyone inside alive. Why? Because that would be illegal. That would be overreach. That would be unlawful use of force. We saw that happen with this boat in Venezuela, and I will tell you very simply why it happened. Because this started in the first Trump administration, when he and his team wanted to be able to blow up boats of foreigners using the United States military. And what did we tell him? No, you cannot do that. It would be a violation of international law. You can't find a boat of unarmed people and just blow them out of the sky. But the president wanted that image. He wanted the optic of being able to just blow boats up to say, don't mess with me. And he's apparently gotten that. What's even more disturbing to me is I saw Marco Rubio, a man who used to believe in the rule of law, who's Secretary of State, tout this legal strike on social media, even though clearly he as well knew that this was not a lawful strike. I've not seen any reporting that anyone on this boat was armed. I've not seen any reporting that the people on the boat represented a threat to U.S. forces, represented a threat to the United States, or represented a threat to any civilians. Certainly the drugs would have. But Anthony, let me tell you, having overseen dozens of these operations, what you would normally do in this circumstance, if you had intelligence that a boat with 11 people was carrying drugs, you know what you do? You go intercept the boat. It's really, really simple.
Apprehend,
There are U.S. forces in the region to go intercept the boat. They would shoot out the engine. They'd board the boat. They'd arrest everyone. And I'm going to tell you why that's better than blowing up the boat. Because you then get to interrogate those 11 people. You get more leads. You track down where the drugs came from, and you are more likely for the long term to shut down that drug operation. Instead of giving a would-be dictator a grainy black and white image of a boat on fire, you can actually do something about the problem. So it's not just that this is illegal, and it's not just that this sets a really bad precedent. It actually doesn't solve the problem. It makes the problem worse.
Finally, Miles, the theme for a lot of the things that we have been talking, it seems, if you think critically about Trump and his policies, is a kind of white supremacy. And we're seeing this with the abduction of people of color from the streets of America, with this increased ICE army, which is about to get $170 billion investment. It's going to be a force that has a bigger budget than most countries' militaries together. How does this end? Because a lot of people are worried about it being Trump's secret police. They're going to eventually be policing polling places when it comes to elections, and that the police state will be the result of a lot of these policies. Is that where this is headed, or do you have a kind of different picture of the future?
That's where it's headed. And anyone who tells you otherwise is not reading the tea leaves. Donald Trump will have multiple bureaucratic entities that could be considered his own secret police. That sounds really outlandish. It's now the reality, because all that really means is, does he have the ability unilaterally to direct different law enforcement agencies to go engage in punitive action, investigative action, or arrests at will, and by his own whims? And normally you would say a president doesn't have that, because there'd be layers of checks and balances and approvals and lawyers. That won't be the case anymore, if not already, with the FBI and with ICE, which will become the largest law enforcement agency, has become the largest law enforcement agency in the United States of America. These will effectively be able to serve as secret police for the president. Now, the extent to which they are really just depends on how much he's going to try to be using them for his own personal purposes. That's really what determines it. And that's pretty scary, that's the only thing keeping us between a normal law enforcement organization and the Stasi in East Germany. So that's, I think, immensely disturbing, as it should be for people. But I want to go back to the start of your question, where you mentioned sort of white supremacy. When I went into the first Trump administration, I didn't buy into the criticisms that Donald Trump was a bigot. Now, I didn't know the man, but I had to think to myself, he may be expressing xenophobic policies, but I bet the real guy is not an actual bigot. I mean, that can't be right. And I wasn't trying to give him the benefit of the doubt on a lot of things, but I thought, people on the left throw around the term racism a lot. I bet Donald Trump's not an actual racist. And then I sat in the Oval Office when he talked about immigration. And I can remember him talking about the countries that he wanted to dial immigration down close to zero or at zero, and the countries where he wanted to dial it up. And when he would talk about the countries he wanted to dial down, he would talk about the Haitis and the Somalias and the Ethiopias and the Afghanistans. You get the picture. And the countries where he wanted to dial up immigration, you would hear him talk about the Denmarks and the Finlands and the Icelands and the Norway and the Swedens.
Well, we saw the white South African farmers recently being given American flags as they arrived into
it became pretty obvious in those conversations. Oh, okay, I get it. He doesn't want poor colored people to come into the country, doesn't want poor brown people, doesn't want poor black people, doesn't want people of color coming in from these places. And he would like white, blonde-haired people to come into the country. I'm not making this shit up. Donald Trump has said this stuff himself now. But after meetings like that, where we would toggle from one to the other, I thought, okay, this guy does have deeply racist tendencies and a deeply racist worldview. And that has manifested into his policy. That is affecting real people's lives. But it goes beyond immigration. And I think that's important for folks to realize, because there are some people, reasonable people, who say, look, I don't like Donald Trump, but I really would like to see illegal immigration end in this country. And maybe they want lawful immigration, but they want illegal immigration to end. Well, to those people, I say this: the apparatus that he is using to crack down on illegal immigration, he can and will use to come after you and your communities. And if that sounds dramatic to you, I just want you to turn on the news as he sends troops and U.S. forces into Chicago, as he sends them into Baltimore, because all of them are not going to be United States military. A lot of them are going to be ICE officers, and their sole mission is not going to be immigration enforcement. Because guess what? People who don't understand DHS don't know that ICE doesn't just enforce immigration policy. They can investigate a vast array of crimes. They investigate cyber crimes. They investigate financial crimes. They do all sorts of work beyond just illegal immigration. So this largest law enforcement agency in the United States, that's now basically directly accountable to the president and the president only, has the ability to come investigate you, Americans, and will come to your city, and you will see these agents doing things beyond just arresting and deporting illegal immigrants. That's why we do need to be worried about, turning ICE into this super organization.
It's hard, isn't it, for us to kind of find an optimistic note here. But I think the message that I'm getting from you, and it's certainly one that I try to push too, is that people need to wake up, and this is not a drill. And that, we look at history, and you've, referenced the Stasi and Nazi Germany several times, and that it can happen here.
It can happen here. It is happening here. And I will give you one note of optimism, which is this. I say a lot to folks that I consider myself an optimistic fatalist. And what do I mean by that? Well, the fatalism is my belief that nature destroys everything it creates. It does. It will destroy Anthony and Miles and this republic and Earth. Nature does that. It's inevitable. But nature also creates everything it creates is from something it has destroyed. Okay, why am I waxing philosophical like that? Because it wasn't that long ago that our founders, who aren't terribly different from anyone listening or from me or Anthony, they were flesh and blood people who'd read a certain set of books and took on some radical opinions. It wasn't that long ago that they decided they needed to do something quite radical and go create a new country. Now, I'm not saying right now we all need to secede from the United States, but what I am saying is we are in a moment where we need non-traditional thinking, because there may come a day where things are looking so bad in the United States that we want to avoid violence, that we want to avoid the total devolution into an autocracy. And we may need to consider how to reconstitute our republic. And I hope that that just means at some point in our future, a new constitutional convention, where as Americans, we're coming back together and saying, hey, we need to renegotiate the civic compact because things got really, really bad. But it may not be that. But there needs to be real conversations about how to avoid that slide, because Americans, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or independents, don't want to live in a despotism. So we need to think about how to get out of that. And the traditional Washington press release put out the talking points in the tweet, that's not going to save us from a despotism. So, but look, the optimism there is it's in our control. We have the ability to do that. And if it gets really bad, no, the answer is not just we get thrown into a second civil war. There are a lot of off-ramps. History shows us there are a lot of off-ramps, and we have the ability to create something new or to resuscitate our republic on the back end of this.
Okay, we have to finish, but for now, Miles Taylor, thanks for joining The Weekend Show.
Thanks, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.